Hello and welcome to an Outlook cover discussion. This week we have with us our editor Chinky Sinha, of course, and we are joined by Mr. N.S. Madhavan, the renowned Malayalam writer, bilingual writer, and former bureaucrat from Kochi. Thank you very much for joining us. So this week in the cover, what we have attempted to do, Chinky ji, like last week we were discussing food, in India, how it varies from region to region. There's a caste variation, and so many. I mean, the religious part of it, etc. And this week we are trying. We have touched upon the language part, which is again. I mean, in similar terms. I mean, I don't know how many dialects and languages we really have at the last count. It again varies. If food varies every 11 kilometers, I'm sure the language varies every 15. So I mean, India it's a rich heritage of both food and languages. The food we have done with now, so we are looking at language again. This is sort of in a diverse country like this, the challenge would be, can a single language be a unifying force or not, or can it lead to more problems? These are the some of the things that we have discussed in the issue. And Chinky, if you would like to, the cover itself, I mean, we can show the cover, and the cover itself and the artwork there, if you would like to talk a little bit about that, which is also a very, very interesting project.
I can talk about the cover in the sense that we were looking for a cover on language. And I remember that, this cover artist is called Mithu Sen. She has worked with this lingual anarchy concept, and she's always talked about, collapsing the language. And we took that on the cover, like a simple exchange of a WhatsApp message. That was the cover art because we thought that was very cryptic, and she talks cryptic, and everything sort of came together. And for when we decided to go with language, I think it came from that Amit Shah statement where he wanted to make Hindi the link language. And then we thought that, okay, this is interesting because we've already done covers on federalism and all of this kind of stitches together. And we thought, why not? Because, when we were learning, also it came from, and I have written about this as well, a couple of years ago when I was researching a story on Bhojpuri, I figured that I don't have a mother tongue, in the sense that my mother spoke Bhojpuri, my father spoke Maghi, but we always spoke Hindi. And for the longest time, I thought Hindi was my mother tongue. And then at 40, I realized that Hindi is not my mother tongue. Actually, there was a dialect and we never learned it. And Bhojpuri struggled to be recognized as a language. So all of that opened quite an interesting, world of various viewpoints about this whole imposition of Hindi. And I remember I studied political science, and it always said that it's a Raj Bhasha, not Rashtra Bhasha. If you see the currency note, and we have that in the magazine as well. You have 16 languages over there, and we have 22 right now in the 8th schedule. There is some confusion with Article 351, and Mr. Madhavan can elaborate on that. But we decided to go with it because I think it's very topical to kind of look at languages in India and what is this unifying thing, and this whole attempt to have this one language, one nation, link language. I was talking to a friend yesterday from Princeton, and he kept insisting that what would be the language of Supreme Court. And my thing was, okay, you have 22 languages. You can just pick up any of them and it can be translated. You don't need a national language. India doesn't have a national language as of now. But Mr. Madhavan can talk more about it.
Well, I was wondering, we have reached a stage in our nationhood and we are mature enough not to worry about a national language. There are countries in the world which have multiple national languages. Like Bolivia has something like 17 to 18 national languages, official language. So this was a pre-independent concern that after independence, the linguistic fermentation may lead to division of India. So probably the national movement leaders. So there was this presupposition that a country needs a national language to join together. That concept or that presupposition or condition was never relevant. I mean, you look at a country like Belgium or Switzerland, which have been existing for centuries with multiple languages. the only area in which communication is necessary between languages is at the official level. It's not at the colloquial level, it's not even at the literary level. It's at the official level, which is a very small part of the use of the language. So for that, you don't have to elevate one of the Indian languages to the position of the national language, hierarchize it, and put ill feelings in the minds of many people. There are languages in India which have, say, multiple alphabets. Konkani, for example, has about 5 alphabets. English, the Konkanis in Kerala will write their language in Malayalam. There is Urdu, there is Maratha, and there is, of course, Devanagari. So these are not actual concerns. These are manufactured concerns, and that a country needs a national language. That has never been the case. Countries have survived without national language. Interstate, state, and center communication can be in one language. And if you take the world as a whole, then that language is obvious choice is English. I mean, you don't write to other countries, or other countries don't write to India in their own language. So we are picking up a problem that's very marginal. Only in the field of official communication, you need a linked language. Otherwise, people are happy to stay as it is. And now, coming to Hindi, I mean, Hindi is a standardized language that's spoken nowhere. If you minus Bhojpuri speakers from Hindi, then they lose about 5 crore people, Eastern UP and Bihar. And similarly, there is Maghali, there is Angai, and there is Maithili. Maithili is accorded the status of a language, but none of the others are. Same is the case with Rajasthani. And so Hindi is a combination of several dialects, and across you use an artificial language. I mean, I should call it artificial because that's not spoken anywhere in India. Nearest will be the Kadiboli somewhere near central India. So an artificial language, and elevate it and put it on all over India, I don't think it's a very good idea. I mean, apart from inflaming passions, it's not a very practical idea.
Getting thrown up that 60% of India speaks Hindi, 3% speaks English. English is neither official nor national for us. It's an aspirational language which kind of actually is beating any other language to it, even Hindi, for instance. Like the RSS run schools had to start teaching English because they couldn't compete with this whole mushrooming of private schools in the hinterland. And Lohia thing about Hindi and this and that. So what do you have to say about this whole argument that keeps getting thrown about many things, this majoritarian thing, like how, 60%, like this majority versus minority in terms of power, in terms of resources, in terms of language, like how do you deal with that?
60% of India speaks Hindi, 3% speaks English, and about 0.25%.
Yeah.
Minuscule requires to communicate with each other. So for that, you pick up a useful language which will help you to communicate with the world. So this argument that India, I don't think RSS have, or any other majoritarianists have ever imagined that at one day India will speak one language. But they don't think so. I mean, what they are trying to say is that replace English with Hindi, which I don't think is a good idea, because the area in which you require an official language is very, very small. And I've seen this dramatic, and then the communication between the people and the government, that should be in the local language. I've seen the dramatic change in Bihar, where initially in the 70s, there used to be petition writers outside the courts or the officers who can write petitions in English. When Hindi was adopted universally as the national language, people could write directly to the government. I mean, that's a kind of communication between the government and the people. It should be the local language. Between governments, that very little communication that happens between governments, that can be in English. I mean, I worked in government of Kerala also. So an average number of letters you get from the government of India per day will be less than 5.
Like, the argument from the other side would be, how can a Tamil Nadu person speak to a Kerala person, and what should be the language of the Supreme Court? Now, my thing is that you have 22 national official languages, pick any, and translation is readily available. That is not a strong argument for having one language. I mean, I just your opinion on that.
No, Supreme Court, it has to be English. There's no doubt, because Supreme Court relies on judgments not only of their own court, but judgments written in US Supreme Court, English Privy Council, and the entire lot of legal literature hangs entirely on language and the interpretation of words. So there you can't switch over easily, or it's impossible to switch over at this late stage. Speaking between people of two places, I mean, that is a problem. I mean, well, forget Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Take a state like Nagaland, which has got several languages. So they can't talk to each other in that language. 97% of Malayalis can speak to Malayalis elsewhere, Malayalis within Kerala, but only about 30% of the Naga people can speak to Naga people within Nagaland. So what Nagaland has done, and which has been taken into our constitution, is to make English their official language.
I had a question also, as you point out in your article, when it comes to Hindi's imposition in the South, languages like Tamil, I mean, Tamil Nadu, they have had very sort of violent past, the 1965 agitation, etc. But as you also say in the article, when it comes to Malayalam, to Kerala, Hindi and Kerala, they've had a rather, I mean, there has not been any this kind of a, the feeling that it's being imposed. I think in Kerala, Hindi film songs of, Lata Mangeshkar and Rafi and Mukesh are more popular than even in the North. The ghazals are, I mean, so many people sing the ghazals there without maybe even knowing what they mean. So, it's been the Malayalis have been more receptive in some ways.
I have a feeling, this I had discussed with, Tamil writers also. Tamil has a tradition of taking any English language, any English word, and translate to Tamil. They have completely tried to avoid English in their conversation. So like all English words, like mask, that's a new word that has come into the language, mask. So Tamil immediately came up with the word mugapatti, whereas Malayalam, it is mask. And also computer, Tamil has a word, kuri, and Malayalam, it is computer. So probably the Malayalam's attitude or approach to language is the same as the English. Absorb as much as you can. And Tamil wants to retain its purity, which many Tamil writers and Tamil intellectuals whom I have talked to have found it very, little bit childish actually. You rush, like the French attitude, French tried to find the French equivalent of all French words, that Tamil does. So that's a difference in approach. Really, I had no problem with Hindi ever. Even now, there are no passionate discussion because I think confidence level of Malayalam is pretty high when it comes to the language.
Okay.
And it's a language that supports a lot of people. We have a very thriving Malayalam media industry, cinema industry, music industry. So the language journalism, so the language itself supports many people. So they don't have much of a problem. And so coming to the other points, there is no need for a national language is borne by the fact what happens to the OTT platforms. A Malayalam movie called The Great Indian Kitchen that was shown all over India in various different languages dubbed. So when technology is with you, why need an official or unifying language? You can use the technology as well. You know, the childish argument with Ajay Devgan was trying to put across. You know, why people are trying to dub movies into Hindi if they don't want Hindi. The answer is that they are looking for bigger market. So market is taking care of the language issue. That's what I feel.
Chinky, of course, apart from the southern languages in the issue, we have various other aspects of Hindi being in Marathi, in Maharashtra there was there was opposition to it. Then they have a very interesting piece on Konkani. Where does that stand? Which script should it follow? That's a very interesting piece by Maya Bhushan that we have. Then surprises. Jammu Kashmir has 4 official languages, as Nasir Ganai, our reporter, points out, and that's another story that we have. Urdu, there's a serious look at Urdu that we have taken. How are they taught in schools? How well, it's kind of coming down. The number of schools teaching Urdu is coming down. The number of students enrolling to learn Urdu is coming down. There's a problem there. That's another thing that we've looked at. Of course, Bengali. I mean, you can't leave that part of when it comes to Hindi imposition. That there is a very curious case where in West Bengal, people feel that Hindi is being imposed, whereas in the northeastern states, the people there feel that Bangla is being, Bangla is the sort of the big brother there. So there's a great analysis that our correspondent Snignendu has done from Calcutta. And of course, apart from all this, as always, there's a very, very exciting back of the book section. Chinky, if you'd like to speak a little bit about Mia poetry, this story that we really worked hard on, and also got the photographs and the illustration. That's a very, very Mia poetry of Assam.
My interaction with the Mia poets date several years ago when I started tracking them, and I thought this language, which was considered like a local, kind of demoralizing term for a community of people who adopted this language and kind of started doing this resistance with writing poetry in it. I mean, that whole thing of, in 2019 or something, if I remember correctly, there were FIRs filed. I don't remember the exact year, but 10 FIRs were filed, and there were people on the run just for expressing their citizenship issues in Mia dialect, right? And this was very interesting to me. So I thought maybe back of the book, our substrata, which we introduced 2 weeks ago, the third one has, the Mia poets from Assam. And we have a very interesting back of the book cover by this artist called Shilpa Gupta. And she had showcased this work in Kochi in 2016, where I saw it. It was imprisoned poets, from across the world, and who were in the prison. And she had taken their poems and kind of did a microphone, and a very interesting installation. So we decided to go with that because for us, each and every image also speaks for itself. On transgender, which obviously is a wonderful work by our photographer Suresh Pandey. And there was one other thing I wanted to ask Mr. Madhavan. This dialect. I mean, the struggle of a dialect to become a language, right? I mean, there's this Mia dialect, of course, we've taken that, but Bhojpuri, for instance, and we commissioned a story on Bhojpuri as well, but that will be online, about this degeneration of a language. Because a lot of people started saying that, Hindi killed a lot of these mother tongues, like, this whole thing. I mean, what do you think about that? And there's this whole confusion regarding Article 351, which kind of talks about promotion of Hindi as a medium of expression. And that creates a lot of confusion. So anything on that, Mr. Madhavan?
Yes, I mean, as far as dialects, especially the major dialects in North India, like Bhojpuri, which has a strong film industry, strong literature. So Hindi, well, how people overcome the Hindi imposition is by indulging in the language much more. For example, the Bhojpuri film industry is probably the number 2 after Bollywood. They have a very strong film industry, strong music industry. This assertion has come in the last 15 or 20 years. This again has to probably do with technology. So when technology made it possible, for example, now even literacy is not required. You don't need to write, because in Arab countries, the illiterate women use WhatsApp voice messages so frequently. So even the need for writing has been reduced by technology. So at this point of time, I think the dialects are safe. I mean, this has happened in Kerala. Kerala, the dialects change in, like Sadish said, like food. The dialects also change in every 10 or 15. So many people didn't know such dialects existed. All this got a boost because of Malayalam films. So Malayalam films started picking up one area and say highlighting the language, food, and the dialect. So there is a whole subgenre of Malayalam movie called Kochi Noir. The dialect spoken in Kochi is very different from the rest of the Kerala. Since Hindi doesn't exist as such, which is not spoken anywhere, so it's going to be an imposition all over North India. It's a super layering on all dialects in North India, because standard Hindi, Manak Hindi is not spoken anywhere. So this is a kind of very fruitless kind of effort. And there are many things, I mean, like what Tamil is doing and international collaboration. Tamil has a strong support from the government of France. The Sorbonne University has a Tamil department that is helping them to make current usage dictionary, which no Indian language has a current usage dictionary like the English. So Tamil is probably getting it through Sorbonne because the French has a Tamil connection through Puducherry. So there are so many things to do within the language, and why go after something that can be achieved only after great effort, bloodshed, money, or let things as they are, because it's good as it is, because nobody in Tamil Nadu or in Kerala has stopped talking to each other because of want of a common language. They manage it, and now that is good. Then how we survive when we go abroad to a place such like where the native speakers refuse to speak in English. So this is a hypothetical problem and a very complicated solution of this national language they are finding out. Ultimately, it is probably imposition of majoritarianism. This has happened elsewhere, like when it's happening right now in Turkey, because Turkish government has more or less banned the language of about 1/3 of people, the Kurdish people. This happened in Spain, where the Catalan was banned during the period of General Franco and the fascist period. So this is a very authoritarian tendency which is trying to hit people in the wrong way and lead to unnecessary problems for which no solutions are required because there are no problems as such. India can talk to each other in whatever language they choose. They have done that. Central state, interstate communications are going on. So,
Right.
and if you look at Government of India ministries, they all have a Hindi department. So a communication to a Hindi state should go to that Hindi state in English. In Hindi is the rule. So the Joint Secretary or whoever will write it in English will send it to the Rajbhasha department, the official language department. They take a couple of days to translate it. Its whole thing is delayed by many days. So it's an artificial problem, but with probably with a lot of political potential, because ultimately it polarizes, and polarization has paid dividend for the present government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Madhavan. I'm sorry, I think, this session may just end soon. So, it's a most interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you very much for joining us and this great talk on languages. Thank you very much, Chinky.